The man, Richard, paused. Children shrieked with laughter. He smiled. The city park shimmered in the heat. The fountain was a kaleidoscope of splashing water and joyous squeals. He remembered those days, days of endless summers, carefree laughter and the simple joy of a water fountain on a hot day. Richard felt a pang of longing for simpler times. He watched mesmerized as the children darted in and out of the water. Their laughter was contagious. He took a step closer, drawn by a force he couldn't quite name. The air around the fountain seemed to shimmer. He blinked. The world dissolved into a dizzying swirl of colors. Richard stumbled, a strange, tingling sensation washing over him. He felt lighter, smaller. His clothes felt loose, then baggy, then impossibly large. Panic surged through him. He tried to call out, but only a confused squeak escaped his lips. He looked down at his hands. They were small, chubby, the hands of a child. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drum in his chest. He was dreaming. This had to be a dream. But the scent of chlorine and wet pavement was too real. The squeals of children too close, too loud. He was a child again. His mind raced, a whirlwind of adult thoughts trapped in a child's body. He stumbled, his legs too short, too uncoordinated. A giggling girl, her blonde hair plastered to her forehead, bumped into him. He landed with a soft thud on the wet pavement. She giggled again, her eyes bright with mischief. "You okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with the unadulterated innocence of childhood. He stared at her, speechless. His voice, when he finally found it, was a high-pitched squeak. He couldn't finish the sentence. She took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled him to his feet. "Come on," she said, "let's play." He found himself swept up in the whirlwind of their play. They splashed each other, shrieked with laughter, and chased each other through the cascading water. He felt a joy he had forgotten, a pure, unadulterated happiness that only existed in the realm of childhood. He was so caught up in the moment he didn't notice his swimming trunks slipping, the weight of the wet fabric pulling them down. It was only when he heard a different kind of laughter, a high-pitched giggle, that held a hint of knowing, that he realized he was standing there, completely naked, just like the other toddlers. His cheeks burned. He felt a rush of adult shame, a feeling utterly at odds with the carefree innocence of the moment. He scrambled to pull up his trunks, but they were gone, vanished. He looked around frantically, but they were nowhere to be seen. The other children, oblivious to his distress, continued to play. He stood there, frozen, unsure what to do. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement. He longed for the heavy weight of his adult life, the burden of his responsibilities. Anything but this. Section 6 trapped in toddler form. He couldn't stay here. He had to get out of this park, away from the judging eyes of any adults who might happen to walk by. He made his way to the edge of the fountain, his bare feet padding against the hot concrete. He reached for the gate, but it was too high. He jumped, his small hands grasping at the metal bars. His attempts to open the gate were met with frustrated whimpers. He was trapped, a prisoner in this playground, his mind a jumble of adult anxieties and childlike helplessness. He sank to the ground, tears welling up in his eyes. Section 7. Echoes of laughter. The other children had moved on, their laughter echoing from a different corner of the playground. He was alone. The sun beat down on his back, and the air was thick with the smell of chlorine and something else, something faint, like ozone or magic. He didn't know how long he sat there, lost in his despair. The shadows grew longer, and the air cooled. The sounds of the city, the distant wail of sirens and rumble of traffic, seemed to fade away, replaced by the gentle whisper of the wind through the trees. Section 8. A familiar face. He heard a soft chuckle. He looked up. Standing before him was the little girl with the blonde hair. She was holding something behind her back. "I found these," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She held out his swimming trunks. He stared at her, his mouth agape. She giggled again, a sound full of secrets and something else, something ancient and knowing. "Don't worry," she said, her eyes sparkling. "I won't tell anyone." Section 9. Hope in tiny hands. He He took the trunks from her, his fingers brushing against hers. They were warm, real. He felt a surge of hope, a tiny spark in the darkness. Maybe, just maybe, she held the key to reversing this strange enchantment. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time he noticed the faint ethereal glow that surrounded her, like moonlight on water. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice still a child's, but with a newfound strength. He slipped on his trunks, the fabric a comforting weight against his skin. He didn't know how, but he knew he would find his way back. He had a feeling this little girl, with her knowing eyes and ancient laughter, would make sure of it. As he played in the sprinklers, he felt himself shrinking, his body de-aging into that of a baby, his swimming trunks becoming a swimming diaper. Meanwhile, the little girl aged into an adult woman, her clothing adjusting to her new form. She looked at him with a nurturing expression and whispered, "I am a witch and I have chosen you to be my child." She began to nurse him, and for the first time, he felt a sense of belonging and peace.